So welcome, folks. We've got another great session in front of us here. Really excited to speak with our next guest. She definitely covers an area that is near and dear to most of us right now. We will be talking with Karen Van Luven, the HR Generalist. We're going to continue this COVID-19 series. This is going to be a really interesting conversation because we're going to be hitting a lot of the topics that relate to COVID and business owners. So thanks, Karen, for joining us.
My pleasure, Jim. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So in some of our previous videos, Karen, we've been talking about, the implications of financial planning and how essential it is at this point in time. We've talked to a business coach about, how to manage the business from a coaching perspective and from a financial planning and strat planning perspective. Many of the things that we had discussed looped back to HR, and with a lot of uncertainty still around the COVID-19, it seems as though employees are taking kind of front stage here during this pandemic. Are you finding a lot of activity on your end?
Absolutely. Since March 12th, I think when schools were announced to be closed for 2 weeks after March break, and March 13th, when the world continued to turn upside down, I was inundated with calls from clients, from former clients, from prospective clients that really didn't know how to deal with, had never faced the challenge of laying staff off, or the significant challenge of having to close up their business because they weren't designated essential, or if they were, how to transition their business to keep employees safe, to keep providing service. The change that every business felt, and how to treat employees legally, fairly, and professionally to save their business. That was the first 3 weeks of the pandemic for me. And then more recently, it's turned and changed into a series of planning for recovery stages. That's a very different kind of conversation, but not without its challenges as well, as we try and hit the restart button at some level, again, depending on your sector, depending on your client base.
Right. And I mean, everything is still changing day by day. And I know here in Canada, we're affected by the US and what they do.
Yes.
As you said, industry by industry is different. You've got some businesses classified as essential, some non-essential. Everything's evolving. And so it seems as though everyone's glued to the news, and, it's hard to predict what's going to happen in the next 5-6 months. So it's definitely an interesting time, no doubt.
I think so, and I think people have been, business owners have been focused on some short-term plans, and also challenged with thinking about what it might look like 3, 4, 5 down the road, and whether or not the new normal will, and how that will impact their business and what that looks like, and getting ready or pivoting for that potential change. I had clients that changed their business overnight, or over the weekend, basically after March 13th. And I've had clients that are really going through the discussions about what does shopping look like, what is the purchase of their service look like, what does their supply chain look like, 3, 4, 5, 6 months out and down the road, and how do they prepare financially, and certainly from my perspective, from an employee base, where their employees are working, how they're working, how we're collaborating as a team, what does leadership look like. All of those kind of questions have come up, depending on, again, who the business is and where they are in their evolution.
Right. Yeah, and it seems to be a case-by-case basis.
Really does.
There's no one-size approach to everyone.
No, that's right. I think there's some common themes, but certainly it's like reading a different novel for each client. It's what's going on in their particular business, and all those factors that impact that business for sure.
Right. So just letting our viewers know a little bit more about you and your background and what it is that you do. We know you're an HR generalist, but you've got some deep experience, working at larger corporations, and then more recently transitioning into your own company and providing
Right.
small, medium-sized, maybe even large companies with HR-related advice. Can you talk a little bit more about I guess, your background as well as how you got to where you are today and what sort of things you, touch on in the HR space?
Sure. Well, I have a business degree from Queen's University, and my first mentor told me that no one started their career in HR; they end their career in HR. So join a big company where you can do something with your business degree, and then try and move within that company into human resources. And only looking back on it, does it look like that was a plan going forward. I started in sales. Moved to marketing, and then had an opportunity to start in a training capacity within that same company, and that was sort of where I fell down the ladder into HR, and really found a love for the generalist aspect of HR. So I've always been a generalist. I've never specialized in any of the specialists, but I have a number of colleagues now who do specialize, so I can always dish to them, and they're a great source of support. But as I said, I've always been a generalist, and my last corporate outing was ended as a restructuring, and one of my former employers, one of the divisions, was spun off, and they became my first client as I started in my business in 2002. So I've worked with small clients ever since, 2 employees up to 50 employees or so. They don't typically have or need a full-time HR person. But they want to set their business on a solid foundation, and they want to create a team environment that's engaging and build capacity within their team. So that's really been my focus. I don't have a significant online presence. Most of my business and new introductions they come from referrals and introductions. So that's, to me, the best way to get new business. It's a warm introduction, and people know what you can do. So that's really where I've spent the last 18 years, moving from small business to small business, and they, as I said, they don't have or need a full-time HR person, but they'll run into a challenge every once in a while, and the idea is to prevent exposure in their business, prevent the costs of employee challenges and issues, and also to build capacity and engagement within their teams.
No, that's fabulous. And I think it's refreshing to see someone with your experience working with smaller business owners, because I think oftentimes there is a gap on the consulting side where, smaller businesses really do need assistance, but they're not finding the level of expertise affordable. So finding someone like yourself is invaluable. We see it all the time when we're going through different deals. It's important to have certain pieces in place, but it's evident that it just wasn't a focal point for the business owner because affordability just wasn't there. And I imagine you likely would see something similar.
Right. Even when in my corporate background, I was on the due diligence team for potential acquisitions within some of the larger companies, and from a client perspective as well. And I've seen HR surprises from the due diligence checklist come up and trash a deal. The lack of employment contracts, lack of understanding of who would pay for an employee transition. Certainly the costs are significant and deal breaking at times. So those kind of environments are challenging but can be planned for, and I think that's one of the keys. And I think that happens a lot in small businesses where, if it's a mom and pop operation, they start with goodwill and a great business practice, and they hire people and they treat them very well, and then they don't necessarily plan for a divorce or a separation or an unforeseen circumstance down the road, and it ends up surprising them with the costs. So that's the idea, is to reduce that exposure by good planning and good documentation and good processes on the way through, build that solid foundation, especially if you're planning to sell. And then if you're not planning to sell, and while you're increasing your value in your business, build the team, build engagement, build capacity within that team, and practice the best leadership practices you can.
Makes sense. I mean, culture is extremely important, as is documentation. And, especially when a buyer comes to the table, if they can validate, what the seller is saying, and actually there's, documentation that shows that there are contracts in place and there are handbooks, and
Right.
they've thought through some of these issues. It does become much more appealing, especially in the lower mid-market with some of the smaller businesses.
Right.
Buyers can be very impressed just by putting some of this documentation in place.
Right. That's what checklists are for.
Yeah. So I know you've created a bit of an overview in terms of some of the topics you want to touch on. So I'll let you take it from here, Karen. Yeah.
Sure. I think this slide is really about what's happened over the last 8 or 9 weeks. The first, as I mentioned, my first 3 weeks were all about talking with clients and to safeguard their business. There were some teary conversations and emotional conversations as business owners were faced with situations that they'd never dealt with before in generations of business in some cases. So it was safeguarding your business so the employees had something to come back to. And that meant doing whatever you needed to do to protect your business. And as I mentioned more recently, it's been planning for stages of meeting the needs of what the recovery looks like, and what the future customers or clients for your business, what they're thinking about and how they're going to buy and how they're going to deal with you. One theme that's been constant throughout is leadership, and I think the successful businesses and the ones who are going to thrive, not just survive, but thrive out of this situation are the ones where they're led effectively, and that's figuring out new ways to communicate, figuring out new ways to engage their employees, making sure that they have a check-in or taking the pulse or the temperature of an employee, because they're faced with all sorts of challenges when working remotely or when asked to do things that they're not normally doing, whether it's a change in business practice or whatever the challenge is. How are they doing? What's going on with them personally, with them at home? And there's certainly privacy is an issue, but it's taken on a new lens, I think, these days, where we have an opportunity to get to know our employees in a different environment, physically and emotionally, and offer services and offer supports that can make sure that they're engaged and adding to the mission.
It makes a lot of sense. When we had Dan Holstein on,
Right.
business coach, he talked about planning for recovery, and in the state of uncertainty right now, there's just a lot of iterations of planning, analyzing, reviewing, planning, strategizing. And to your point, what he was saying is the effective businesses, the ones that are going to continue to move ahead, are the ones that are adjusting, the ones that are
Right.
anticipating what's going to be before them in the next little while. And it's just a continuous iteration. Would you say, it's similar to one who's looking at employees and what to do with staffing?
I think exactly that. Exactly that. I think it's. I've been involved with several clients in scenario planning, and it's not just the what isn't even clear anymore. The when is certainly not clear. I think there's a number of different strategies and scenarios around what service offering, where can we leverage, how do we do this, and being ready for the when. The when is going to happen. If you're essential, it's already happening. If you're not essential, it's about to be, for Plan 1 in the province of Ontario, or Stage 1, I guess. But everything's on the table, and I think to engage your team in that scenario planning is a tremendous way, number one, to get the best answers, to get the best strategies, and to make sure that you're being transparent with your team, trusting your team, and making your job as a leader and a business owner, frankly, easier, because you've got the best answer. You can put your finger on the pulse of your team and understand how engaged they are, how able they are to input into the team, how well they are emotionally and physically, and make sure that they are have every opportunity to be part of the vision for the future and challenging that vision. It's not going to be what it was on March the 2nd. It's going to be different for sure.
Right. Adaptation is key. And yeah, we are seeing a couple of camps, one camp that would prefer to sit on their hands, put their head in the sand and wait and see what happens. And, the others are trying to be proactive and really anticipate the next state and see if they can capitalize on it. And it's, it's employees are really critical at the end of the day. And it might be an opportunity, depending on the industry, to get ready for the busy season and look and see who's out there.
Right.
Yeah, so we're seeing mixed things as well. Yeah, so I noticed that you listed some of the key priorities for business owners. Can you walk us through what some of the tactics and strategies are for individuals at this point?
Sure. I think I may have covered that in my previous situation or previous answer, but the first stage was to safeguard your business and your employees, making sure that you laid people off and help them access government support programs, communicated clearly and effectively. Certainly there may be challenges of constructive dismissal when it comes to permanent layoffs or temporary layoffs becoming permanent. We may see some of those challenges, but I'm not a labor lawyer, but my advice to clients right from the beginning was do what you need to do to protect your business so that employees have a chance to come back and work for you again. Right. And then the second stage after week 3 for me was planning for stages of recovery. And we've just talked about that in terms of what that looks like, and not necessarily when, but what are the options? What are the scenarios that may exist? What are the key areas to focus on? And therefore, how do I bring employees back safely? And then the leadership theme running throughout, communicate, listen, and respond. I would hesitate to make pronouncements because that assumes that you, as a leader, know more than others. And I think we're all learning. I think we're all taking advice from certain media channels and from the science, and being careful and prudent about how we ask employees to come back and how we protect them. Our duty to protect employees does not go away, whether they're working remotely, whether they're working back on site or introduced back into the workplace. We have an obligation as employers to ensure that the workplace is safe. And that's a big area I think we're going to delve into in the next couple of weeks as we hear more and more employees coming back to work.
Yeah, and that's one of the big questions that a lot of folks have been asking us is, how does one deal with that if you're an essential business and you're now allowed to open, and your business really is client facing? Let's use a grocery store as an example. Do you see there being some legal ramifications or issues with some employees just not feeling safe, even though the government has opened up the business essentially to say, hey, it's time to open up shop, we need to continue operations?
Sure. Yeah, I think so. I think we've been experiencing some of that already. Some of the government supports, while it absolutely been necessary to ensure that people have money for basics and money for the necessities, I think it may create a disincentive in some regards, where people are concerned about coming back to work and are concerned about showing up in a crowded grocery store, and would make the choice to stay home when they're supported through the C.R.P. So I think that'll be challenging. I think there may be challenges with employees taking public transit to return to work if that's their only option. The law hasn't changed. The health and safety practices haven't changed. We still have a duty to accommodate. We still have a duty to investigate a work refusal on the basis of health and safety legislation. I don't know that any work refusals have been upheld at this point because of COVID-related issues, but they haven't been fully investigated yet. I think the Ministry of Labor is very much focused on key areas and ones that we may have heard about in the news to get to all of the challenges that have been put in place. So I think we're right at the start of those kind of challenges. So what employers I think should do in terms of re-engaging their workplaces is outline the areas where they have made changes, what to expect from employees who are coming back to work, and engage their employee workforce in how can we make sure that you feel comfortable and safe when you are returning to work. What ideas do you have? What do you need to come back? And if they can work remotely, please continue to do that. That's the safest place. But some employees need to be at work, and some functions need to happen, and there's that balancing act. I think we've seen as consumers, we've seen grocery stores and other retail establishments that have been open since the beginning. I think we've seen them evolve with plexiguard and way marking signs and directional signs and footprints on the floor where it marks out 6 feet away. I think we're going to see a lot of those concepts translate into every business as they reopen as well.
Right. It's a good model and footprint, I guess, for some of the other establishments as they come online, for sure. Yeah. Some of the priorities, I guess, that business owners, need to be cognizant about. I know, as you mentioned, some folks start their business, there may be one individual, but as they grow and expand, the needs increase. And oftentimes, people will hire an accountant, they'll hire a lawyer when there's a legal related issue or they're incorporating. But on the HR side, when we say employees are our most valuable asset, what are some of the things that, a business owner should be looking at? And especially if they have some downtime now, what are some things that you'd recommend they pay attention to?
Sure. I think I've always worked in two different areas with business owners and entrepreneurs. And that the first thing, and often a new engagement for me, will start with the left side of the screen, managing exposure. And that's there's a fire, there's a problem, there's a challenge, and we need to get that resolved. So often we can do that with the introduction or the tune-up of employment contracts. Sometimes there's a WSIB issue, and I have a great health and safety colleague to prevent those issues. But if there is a WSIB challenge, I can often help in the later stages of that. Or there's been a claim for wrongful termination. The business needs a change. The skill sets that we have currently with a particular employee just don't fit with where we're going, and we want to restructure the business for the future. Certainly to have HR policies or a handbook in place helps set expectations and reduce or limit the exposure that employers have. I have a background in labor relations. I've been involved in a number of different dozens of union negotiations and collective agreement renewals over the years. So I'm happy to help with that. And often that's an area where certainly labor lawyers can help with all of these areas. If to serve the needs of small businesses, an HR consultant can sometimes help with being lower cost, quite frankly. And the idea is to be preventative, not to wait till there's a fire to put out, but to set the stage so that the exposure is managed proactively. And then once you're involved, it helps to build the team by building capacity within that team through some skills training, how to do a performance review, how to have that constructive feedback conversation, for instance. I have some access to compensation and benefit plans that are market related that may help to ensure that you're paying employees fairly and competitively for their skill set in your target market. Employee engagement surveys. If you want to know how your employees are feeling, ask them confidentially and then tell them what you heard from them. And often that can be done through a third party that gives you a bit better information. I love to talk to business owners about their plans for the future, about succession planning for key areas and often for the business as a whole. How are we going to evolve? And certainly, whether we call it succession planning or not, certainly those have been topics of conversation as we go through those scenario planning given this current crisis. Right. Leadership development, some ideas and tips and tricks that I've learned over the years from great leaders that I've had the opportunity and the good fortune to work with, and how can we apply that to building the entire team. So my tagline has changed over the years, and this is the current one. Employees are a huge investment. Let's make it pay off. And I believe that. I think that speaks to business owners. Employees are critical. They're they're the key, not just from an HR consulting perspective, but in any business that I work with. You can't do it on your own. I don't have employees myself, and that's no secret, but in my business, but I certainly understand how business owners invest in their employees and what they hope to gain out of that. And the great ones I don't talk to very often because they don't have a problem. They want to build capacity within their team, and that's great fun to work with. But usually an introduction for me is to help manage that exposure on from a problem or a fire that we need to put out.
I'm just curious, when you meet with various businesses, is there a correlation between the quality of the people and how well the business does from a growth perspective? Because I mean, oftentimes what I hear people say is, I just can't find good staff, they're not loyal, and they really struggle to continue to build their business. They seem to plateau. And I'm wondering if you see some of these common missteps perhaps, or common themes where perhaps they're underinvesting, or businesses just can't get over that hurdle because of the quality of individuals or their strategies in place.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure there's one size fits all for that, Jim, but I do think that it's about the culture of the business, and very often, or I think in every case, leadership starts the culture and continues with forming the culture. And I think employees don't wake up and get out of bed and think, I'm going to mess with the company today. I'm going to do everything I can to row against the current. I don't think that. Certainly there are employees that haven't earned the right to work in a great organization, and we can help with that by treating them fairly and professionally, and helping expand their employment horizon somewhere else. Very, very clearly. But I think ultimately there's so much to do to create that environment that's engaging. So I think behavior is a function of the individual and the environment. I think the individual we're not going to change, but we can, as leaders in the organization, create the right environment where the individual has no choice really, and has every option to be successful within that environment. Right. There's lots of different tactics that we can employ to do that, but it all comes back to leadership.
Right. No, it makes a lot of sense. Now, Karen, if people have specific questions for you, are they able to reach out to you?
Absolutely. Thanks for this. My initial consultation, whether it's a phone call or an email connection back and forth, is always complimentary. When I put together a plan or a proposal after I understand the situation a little bit more, then you'll easily know what the project might run in terms of an investment, or what an ongoing relationship would look like. But I'm happy to hear from business owners with small businesses that don't have a full-time HR person. Happy to have that initial consultation. Absolutely.
Perfect. Thanks so much for joining, Karen. This was extremely valuable. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. Best of luck.